Hey everybody, Conscious Medium Brandon Russ. Thanks so much for joining me. And today we're going to take a look at Dan Rather. With all this conversation about, news organizations getting their hand caught in the cookie jar, lying about things and just flat out making stuff up, I thought it would be a good time to take a look at Dan Rather, someone who actually stood up for his own integrity and kind of did the right thing. I think it's worthwhile to take a look at the astrology to understand where we've been and where we're going to. Now, Dan Rather was in our homes for many, many decades, and on the CBS Evening News, he got caught because he didn't fact check one of his sources. It ended up being a full storm for him, and we're going to take a look at the astrology as to why it would happen when it happened. But make no bones about it, Dan Rather was trying to do the right thing. Here we go on the next Stream of Consciousness. Dan Rather, good old Uncle Dan, showing up into everybody's home. Well, we've got a couple of things to look at because I'm actually going to make the argument that he was actually a journalist that just simply tried to take a shortcut. He was not somebody that was, necessarily trying to fool anybody or anything else. He just was pressed for time. And yes, he might have done this more than once, but this is the time that he called, and I quote, a mistake in judgment. He owned it. So as I go through all of this, I want you to recognize what the talking heads today do, which is blame everybody else. And I want you to take a look at Dan Rather and how he actually absorbed his integrity and did what he felt was the right thing. So let's take a look here at his astrology. And I got Dan the man up here in the corner. And I'm just really going to take a look at the moment in time where he left CBS News. Now, in this process leading up to it, he got caught up in a document scandal where George W. Bush was running for president, and I can't believe this is 2005, and then this is, 2005. Can you believe this is 2005 that we're talking about George W. Bush? And basically, in a nutshell, he got this document that talked about how George W. Bush received preferential treatment. By the way, he was the son of a CIA operative. He was going to get specialized treatment. Was it in documentation? I don't know. But according to Dan Rather, he received this on a tip and he never really followed it through. And it turned out to be falsified. Somebody actually sort of set him up. But let's take a look at the astrology as to why things would fall apart the way that it does. So when we take a look at this, he actually has not only a T-square, he's got a fixed grand cross here. This is a type of energy you don't get out unscathed. Sometimes it's for the best. And if you ask maybe his family and his wife and what have you, maybe this was for the best, right? Well, we take a look at a couple of things. And of course, I did a great job of trying to mark up all of this, that I covered up half of the crap. But here we go. Let me talk about it. So up here where you've got Mars sitting here in the ninth house, the ninth house is about the lesson, right? The religion, the part where you're like, okay, here's the stuff we're really supposed to know. We have a warlike planet in Mars, and then you have the fixed energy, or I should say the tough energy of Capricorn here. And this is over his Saturn. This right here, where all my markers are right here. You've got Saturn, and then you've also got Vesta, which is about exposing and discovering the truth. Believe it or not, and again, I'm going to defend Dan Rather, not because, and by the way, I don't have a horse in the race. I didn't even really watch CBS News, but according to his chart, he actually was based in the foundation to find the truth. He was actually in opposition to Pluto in the third house, the communication house. He found empowerment to be able to tell the story. He found empowerment to be able to speak to people. This is why he was a good newscaster, right? And then you have what was going on in the sky at the time. You had Jupiter in his sixth house, his personal house. In other words, is this really going to go the way I think it's going to go with the people around me? And then you had Mercury sitting here in the 11th house in Aries, some really kind of tough energy. Well, this right here created a grand cross. And now we're going to actually point out that his Saturn was sitting here in the 9th house and in opposition in the 3rd house. In conjunct with this Pluto, it's kind of an up is down and down is up. Saturn was in the water sign of Cancer. That allows him to say, I have to speak from the heart. And by the way, anybody that saw his heartfelt apology, he literally said it was a mistake in judgment. I thought I was clean. I thought it was good. I went with it. When it was brought to my attention that it wasn't, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have used it. It was a mistake in judgment. Do you think Tucker Carlson is going to say that now? Do you think Maria Bartiromo? You know Sean Hannity doesn't have it in him. You're certainly not going to hear from any of the other talking heads there. You've got bad behavior in journalism all over the place now. As a matter of fact, what is a journalist? Take a look at Dan Rather's chart right now. Even in his natal chart on the inside here. And again, I'm sorry I covered it up here. But his Mars, or I should say his Sun and Mercury, are in conjunct in the 6th house. Now, what does Mercury and the Sun do coming together? It means he's going to be a great orator. And by the way, if you watch most of these analysis, Mercury has a key placement for someone who's famous, right? So that's in conjunct. And by the way, it's also in conjunct with Venus. He truly loves what he does. And as one of his personal houses, he has personal integrity. It's in his chart. But look at how this yellow triangle here creates the triad with Mercury, Mars, and then, of course, Jupiter here. This was kind of his undoing. Because here in the 7th house, you know, the things that people were saying about him in the public, Mercury in the 11th house, and then the lesson that he needed to learn with Mars in the 9th house, in opposition or in conjunction with his Saturn, in opposition to Saturn in the sky, this really set up a contentious scenario for him. What did he do? He did what he felt was the right thing. Dan Rather resigned and then stayed on for a little bit of time just to kind of show them like, hey, you're not going to bulldog me. I'm going to stick around, whether it be for the money or what have you. Then he put out a book. What Unites Us? This is where I'm going with this, everybody. Do you think that any one of the talking heads at Fox would actually write a book about what unites us? By the way, he takes a look at things such as patriotism, talks about how the demagogual factors of our politicians and how we build them up just to tear them down. He takes a look at personal accountability and responsibility and what it is to really be a good citizen. He also talks about the dynamics in which, when you're faced with times of trouble, what you need to go back to. For him, it was faith in his family. See also his 4th house. For Dan Rather, he was able to write a book about the integrity and what actually brings us together. In a 2011 interview, I think it was a little bit sooner than closer to our time here, like 2016, 17. He was promoting this book, and maybe it was another book that he had out, but he had an interview with Sean Hannity. And he literally looked him in the eye and said, I think that you're one of the most diabolical people ever. And Sean Hannity was just like, I'm your colleague, buddy. And Dan Rather stopped him and said, no, you are not. The way that you lead people on and then anger them and incite them is you are trying to convince them of your opinion. You are not telling the news. He made a clear differentiation between him and what the current temperature of journalism was. That's why I felt it was a fair shake to say that Dan Rather, although what he did was a mistake, he owned it and he did the right thing. Let's see if the other yahoos and talking heads can do the same. All right, guys, going to give the heart tap out to integrity and the work that we're meant to do. Thanks again, Dan Rather, for coming into our homes all those years after 60 minutes or wherever the hell it is that they placed you, and keep going. By the way, he's retired in Texas, and the last I heard is he writes opinion pieces for the local paper. That's someone who loves their job. See you guys soon.